This is Brent Richardson, and welcome to the Business Minutia Podcast, where our focus is on the details of business that are often passed over by traditional classes and leadership training. We focus on the stories of real people who have tried, failed, and learned through their experiences and are willing to share their lessons with others. Well, folks, unless you've been in a cave for the past couple of weeks, you're familiar with what's going on in the news right now. And in addition to all the craziness that has taken place in 2020 so far with COVID-19 and everything else, now you have to decide, Jamie, do you like law enforcement or black people?
What about black law enforcement?
You're looking for that middle ground. It doesn't exist.
Oh.
You have to make a decision now. So we try to pride ourselves, and I've debated through this, myself as a podcaster. Like, all right, I want to cover every topic, and then how do you cover this topic? Right? Very challenging.
Well, you've looked in the mirror, right? You are a white
nobody cares,
dude.
What the white dude from Texas thinks. So how do I go cover this? Well, it just so happens that one of the most influential people that's been in my life, at least from a career perspective, that I've just learned so tremendously from, happens to be a black man. And he happened to be willing to come on the podcast to talk about this. So I wanted it to be something. There's so many other things I want to talk with Hubie Payne about. So many other great topics, incubation of ideas, just so many things that I've learned. And yet there's nothing more relevant than what we're dealing with right now. And the real question that we want to talk about is, why do corporations care? Why do business-minded people care? Right? We all have our own personal opinions, but why do companies care about this?
They should care.
And what can they do? And then
right.
How complicated is this issue? That's where we want to get into, right? So this is more than just tea time with the guys. We were having coffee, but it's really more about what do corporations, what can they do? Why should they care? So I couldn't ask for a better guest to talk about this than the amazing Hubie Payne. Enjoy, folks. Hubie, maybe tell us a little bit give us your career path. Who are you? How did you get to where you are?
Sure. So I'll just briefly or quickly go through my life. I was born in Bronx, New York. I was raised in Queens, single parent household for a few years, but my mom remarried. My stepdad and my mom raised me. We were kind of a middle class family. I grew up mainly in a Jewish middle class neighborhood in New York. Most of my closest friends were Jewish. It was kind of a mixed neighborhood demographically, but predominantly Jewish. We had, we were not wealthy, but we were not the poorest of poor. And in terms of education, I went to public schools in New York. I developed a love of science and math. I decided to study engineering. I started in community college because I didn't have enough money, basically. So I started in community college with a plan to transfer to a four-year university. In between that, I joined the Navy because it was a way for me to save money to finish college. I spent some years in the Navy. When I came out, I enrolled at Florida State University, where I studied electrical engineering. I graduated from the College of Engineering in the 90s. I joined TI as an intern before graduating. So I've been with Texas Instruments almost 24 years. My career path's very straightforward. I joined as an application engineer. I learned quite a bit about automotive. That's really where I spent the majority of my career. In the very beginning, I worked on hard disk drive controllers. Not that anybody cares about such things, but so I came through the ranks, did a little bit of application engineering, became a manager of people. About 4 or 5 years into my career, moved my way through both the automotive embedded processing side of electronics. Then I joined Analog about 10 years into my career, and there I became vice president of engineering in Analog, and my current role is vice president of quality for the corporation. So that's kind of my career path. Family-wise, I come from an interesting family. I think everybody thinks their family's interesting, but certainly I think mine is. My mom's mother is 100% Greek, And since the topic here is race, I think this is kind of interesting and relevant. My grandmother is actually Greek.
Wow.
She's from, her last name is Toulouse, and she's from Patras, and she's 100% Greek. So my mom is half Greek, half black. My grandmother married a black man in Chicago in the 30s, and so with all that, we heard a lot of stories about that growing up. Yeah. But I've always been around a very multiracial, mixed type of family environment. Now, so we have that interesting tidbit that's kind of informed some of our opinions on this. I'm actually I've been married for 20 plus years to a beautiful, quite sexy, actually, Irish lady, and we have 2 daughters, both 13, and that's kind of our family background. So it is, and I am black, right? I guess we're on the radio. That's a good thing. Or
there'll be pictures.
No video, but it's good because I have a face for radio. That's good. But nevertheless, that's kind of my background.
Yeah. So at what point? So you're raised in an environment where you've got all kinds of races, all kinds of people. So that becomes your like standard norm. I remember hearing someone ask me years ago he asked me what the hardest culture was to understand. And I thought about it for a while, and I was doing a lot of work with Japan, and it was really challenging. And that was my answer. And he was like, no, the hardest culture is yours because you don't recognize it as culture. It's just gospel. And I was like, oh man, that's really true. Mm-hmm. Right. So what point did you start to realize that this is not the norm?
You know, it was interesting. I think it's a great question. And I think your friend was correct. I think that is the benefit of growing up in kind of such an environment where there are so many different types of cultures. And I think it's because you quickly realize that there are differences. I'll even give you an example. When I moved to the South, when I first moved to Texas and to Florida, everybody here referred to themselves. I would ask people, hey, what are you? Right? And they would say, oh, I'm white. And that was very odd to me because if you ask a New Yorker, what are you? They're going to tell you I'm German, I'm Irish. It's very specific, and they all have very different identities. And as New Yorkers, we navigate very differently. Right? Where I'm not talking about the same things to an Italian guy that I am to an Irish guy, to a German guy. And in New York, the blessing of growing up in New York is, as soon as you think you've mastered all cultures, some boat shows up with a load of people from somewhere, and they get off, and you're like, oh, okay, we don't know who these people are, and you have to learn them, right? I remember viscerally feeling odd in the 80s and early 90s when the Russians, when the USSR broke up and a lot more Russians started immigrating to America, and we got an influx of Russians, and we were like, oh, who are these people, right? And they had a very different way of looking at things. When I moved to the South, it was very different, right? It's just kind of white and black. There is really no in between, and that was the starkest realization for me that these things just continue to be different.
Yeah. Right, especially down here, it still seems that there's pockets where it's like, where am I? There are certain places. So I'm a white guy from East Texas, mm-hmm. and so every time I go home, sometimes like this place is this is an interesting place.
It's a little different.
It's a little different.
That's right.
Yeah. And it is changing. It slowly changes. But so let's come back to your success in the corporate world. You come with this background of such a wide variety of experiences, working with so many different races, so many different people. Was there a time in the corporate environment you realized, okay, this is going to create some challenge? I think, it gives you some strategic advantage, right? Because you come with that worldview or a different background, mm-hmm. but then you're working and dealing with people who don't, right? So how did that start to affect in your kind of career path and your thinking?
Sure. I'll tell you, I'll give you a little interesting fact about my university. Florida State University is a predominantly white school. It is a tier 1 research public university, and it is well funded and huge. And it shares an engineering school with Florida A&M University, which is a historically black college and university. And so that was a fascinating experience because you had this clash of cultures, both just from a university perspective, they just handle things differently. And then you had a real clash of cultures in terms of culture, like HBCU operates very differently than a predominantly white university. And I will tell you that those types of experiences prepared me well. When I got to TI, there were people from India, from Malaysia, from Japan, from all types of places that I had never encountered, right? That deeply, right? And didn't have deep friendships with those types of people yet. But just being able to navigate variety of cultures comfortably. Not that you understood it and you could figure it out, but you had no fear about it.
Sure.
And I think going to that university helped even build that too, because I saw, even though it was still American culture, it was kind of, it was two different views. And I think that was tremendously powerful. And that helped me in a corporate America quite a bit. Now, I still had to, navigating people is one thing. Then there's doing the work, right? So you have to be a great engineer to continue to progress. That's a whole different story, right?
Yeah.
But just from a people and cultural perspective, being comfortable to float between cultures and to immerse yourself in them and being willing to learn. And what you learn, the more you do that, the more you learn quickly that there's so many beautiful things about every culture.
Yeah.
That you just almost get addicted to wanting to understand how people think. Like Japan is a very foreign place. You brought it up, right? Yeah. Japan feels very foreign when you first get there. And when I mean foreign, is odd to you, right? It's very different. And once you go there a few times, you start to realize just how incredible the Japanese culture is, and just how amazing the way they view things can be, and you start learning, right? But when you first get there, it's quite terrifying because you just it's like a different. And I actually had somebody at work tell me that once. They told me, "Hey, I finally think I understand what it's like to be a black guy," and it was a white employee, and I said, "Oh, well, do tell, right? Do tell." And he said, "I went to China and I got assigned to China for months, and I had to spend 7-8 months there. And I realized at one point, about 45 days in, that I had not seen another white person in a month and a half. And I felt just everywhere I went, I was different, and eyes were on me, and I felt like I didn't understand the nuances, and I didn't. And I said, and he asked me, is that kind of how you feel in America? And I said, well, not really, because at the end of the day, we've been here a long time, right? So we're part of the fabric. Right. But it is a great example of what you can feel when a culture either doesn't welcome you or you don't feel comfortable enough to really want to get welcomed. Either way, right? And so that's kind of been my experience.
I do think, and that helped me too. The first time I left U.S. soil and went to Asia, I had similar kind of feeling where you go, oh man, I being in Japan, being in downtown Tokyo amongst people that are maybe half my size. I was a big guy, and I'm also pretty tall, and I'm wearing like some colorful suit, or reasonably colorful, and everybody else is wearing black and white, standard issue, it seemed like, suit. And I remember leaning over to another guy that I was standing there on the street with and said, what I love about Tokyo is I blend in here. And their culture doesn't get that kind of sarcasm all the time. Yeah. And he looked at me and he goes, Brent-san, you did not blend in here at all. Got it. Okay. Yeah. But I did. You eventually fall in love with learning that new culture. And every time you go, you're learning something new,
Absolutely.
Right? If everybody would, catch that bug, I think it does have an effect, right?
So, why was I excited about your offer to come talk about this very difficult topic is because there is a real corporate imperative for understanding the importance of this and why this matters. And
why?
I think,
Why is that? Why is that important?
I think, what you just described, how can we get better at this? Why does this matter to corporations? There are, I put it simply, right? There are different and evolving views on these topics. And I think we can dive into what the topic is, right? That would be helpful too. But I think there are different and evolving views on this topic. And one of the things I observe, especially from the earlier career people, is that, being willing to tackle these things and talk about them, being willing to have an opinion on what's right and what's wrong about some of this are table stakes for these people, for these employees. And so for corporations that think about their high potential talent and where that talent's going to come from. Innovative things come from young people. We don't like to say that, but at the end of the day, that's where most innovation comes from. And for tech companies, other companies as well, that younger group of employees, those really motivated people, they care about this and they have a strong opinion. Yeah. And it's not that they all agree, but they want to work at places that have values that matter, that stand for something. And by the way, they're not like my generation. They're fearless, right? That somehow, I guess they've never really lived through a depression or they're not worried about eating or paying the rent, right? They care about mattering, and they just won't stay at a place. It's not even like they don't even understand why we're debating this. Yeah. They just think it's ridiculous, and They want to know what you think now. And you know, taking 3 weeks to figure out the nuanced position you're going to have about this as a corporation is really no longer the norm, right? People won't stand for it. They just want to know, okay, where are we at? How do we feel about this? So it's important for corporations to really figure this out because their future pool of employees, and their talent are really going to care about this. And you see it even today, right? My inbox, when all of this started happening, my inbox was filled with people asking, hey, I want to know what we're doing about this. I want to know how we are thinking about this. And by the way, it was not a universal opinion about what we should do. It was just we want action, right? We want something to happen. Some people, if you ask my opinion, they wanted good things to happen, and some people wanted bad things to happen. But a huge group of people wanted something to happen. Yeah. So it is imperative for corporations really to figure this out because it's just not it's no longer good enough to say, hey, we stand for equality and we want everybody to be equal.
Or to sit silent and just let the dust settle. Right.
Well, that's the interesting thing, Brent. I think there are 3 types of people that look at this. You know, there are people who feel they're oppressed by all of this, right? So let's talk about what we're talking about here, right? What we're really talking about is systemic racism at the end of the day, right? And you know, America struggles with this, right? We don't like to talk about it. We want to believe it's in our past. That's important, not because we want to brush it under the rug, but because it's so painful, right? And it's such a hard thing to talk about. And so, you know, that's what we're talking about here. And we're talking about, and the police issue is just the most visceral, clear to see example of it. And that's why people have really, in my opinion, why they've latched onto it, right? So let's talk about what we're talking about, right? So we're talking about 3 people in the near past who were killed by police or vigilantes, right? So we're talking about George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, and those 3 people were killed. So you know, it's the thought process of America that we're talking about here. So what do people do? The very first thing that happens is, okay, so somebody was killed at the hands of the police or vigilantes. The first question we ask is, what was that person up to?
Right.
Right. You know, like this person was a criminal. So we attempt to victimize the person and to figure out what they were doing that was wrong, right? And our first reaction, because, you know, our impression is you do the right thing and everything always works out for you. This is the American fantasy, right? That if you just do the right thing, you're going to be just fine. And we all have the same level playing field and it's all good, right? And, you know, by the way, it's pretty darn good in America. We shouldn't lose sight of that. But it's not the fantasy we have. We should slay that fantasy because it's not really a fantasy. It's an aspiration.
Sure.
And it's something that an aspiration has to be worked toward. A fantasy, you never work toward it because you just believe it. It's magic, right? But an aspiration is something you got to put some work into. And that's where we miss the mark, I think, as a country, right, as a people. So what are we talking about here? The first step is let's victimize the person. Let's get everybody convinced that the reason this man had to choke George Floyd to death was because he was a bad guy and he was resisting orders. And had I not choked him to death, he would have gone on to do more bad things. So I'm protecting you. And everybody says, yeah, that's good. You're a good guy. Thank you. And we go back to sleep because the system wants to go back to equilibrium. You're an engineer.
Yeah.
The system wants to reach equilibrium. It does not want to be in these hyper states of unrest. It does not want to think there's a problem. It wants to think the fantasy is reality, and it wants to move back to that, right? It's very important for people that, like, on all sides of this argument. Everybody wants to believe this is not a problem. So anything you can give the majority to give them an idea that this is not a problem, they will lap it up. They latch onto it because, and it's not human nature. It doesn't make them bad people. It's human nature. So first thing we do is we create this victim thing. Is this guy was a bad guy, right? Now the interesting thing about these 3 cases is that George Floyd was accused of passing a $20 bill, and you can either believe he was a criminal mastermind and had a printing press in his house, and he learned how to replicate American currency to an extent that he could pass $20 bills, or he might have gotten $300 out of the Wells Fargo account and they passed him a counterfeit $20 bill and he passed it on, or he took monopoly money and was just trying to do something squirrely. Yeah. But any way you slice it, he was doing something very nonviolent, and he was doing something that is in essence a minor crime. Okay, if he was doing it, by the way, there's still no evidence or any really conversation about that, right?
Yeah.
So that's one case. The case of Breonna Taylor, and again, she was sleeping in her own bed, so we don't even know. I mean, I don't even know how. Now they attempted to criminalize her too because they say, oh, the boyfriend was a drug dealer, right? And they just want to give you this spooky, be scared. They're coming for you. They're playing on that, right? So they're like, the boyfriend was a drug dealer. The reality is she was an EMT. She was a first responder sleeping in her own bed, ready to get up to go to work, and the cops kicked the door in mistakenly, just an honest mistake. They just picked the wrong door. They kicked it in and they killed this woman. And that was I could believe easily that was an error. What occurred after it was a crime. Okay, the first thing could have been an error. The third thing is a guy's jogging down the street in Georgia, and these guys jump in a truck. They're like, oh, this guy's no good because, this is what goes on, and we're going to drive around, and they run him over, and then they shot him 3 times with a shotgun. The original story was that there was a big struggle. There was an argument. He wasn't listening to us. We were trying to tell him that he needed to, we were going to put him under citizen's arrest. That was the original story. The autopsy that was written, or the story was that there was a struggle for the gun and it went off and he was killed or whatever, whatever flimsy story it was. And then the story to victimize him was he was walking through a house that was being built in the neighborhood and we thought he was a crook, right, stealing stuff. As though if a house is being built in our neighborhoods, we don't all walk through to see what the new floor plan is and what ideas you could get to decorate your house. Somehow it's different for a black person, right? He must have just been in there trying to steal the wood or whatever these people are doing, right? So first step is always victimize the victim. And then everybody feels better because we want the system to go back to quiet. Now, when that doesn't work because it's so patently ridiculous, and then that was the case in all 3 of these cases, the next step we take is to sell the officers out, right? Yeah. We'll say, okay, you're right. There's a couple of bad apples, right? And you're right. These guys were bad, and they, most cops are good. These guys were bad.
Outlier behavior.
So we because again, the system wants to calm down, right? Yeah. And if you tell them that 99% of police are good, then the 1% is the problem, and these were examples of the 1%, and we're going to punish them, right? They never attempt to answer the question why that wasn't the narrative in the beginning. Yeah. Because remember, the narrative in the beginning was these were bad guys, and the cops did the right thing, right? So they don't answer that question because, again, they're just trying to placate and calm everybody down.
Because we really don't want to drive down to the root cause and spend the time to clean that out.
That's tough work. It's tough work. It's not malicious. It's just overwhelming. When you really stare at the scope of this,
it's big.
It's big. It's so bad that you would just want anything to go away, right? You just want anything to have it happen. And I talked to some senior leadership at where I work, and that was really their major concern. They said to me, this news cycle is going to end. All news cycles end. And then what happens? How are we going to fix this when people aren't so angry? And they're right? You've got a brief moment where people understand the depths and the horror of this and they're willing to do something, and it requires sustained energy. So that step around, okay, we victimized them. That didn't work. Now we're going to sell these police out and we're going to make them the scapegoats because we have to. By the way, we don't like doing it, but we'll sell a couple of those guys out as long as we can keep the system going, right? So they sell those guys out and they prosecute them. Now, the questions that don't get asked and answered is, here's an example. In the case of George Floyd, when he was killed, the prosecutor looked, the district attorney and the prosecutor looked at the evidence and decided no charges should be filed. We're going to move forward. No problem. These people did nothing. They didn't even discipline the police. Okay. Now, they were later arrested and charged with murder and aiding and abetting murder. Now, you can either believe that only happened because of the protests, and or you can believe that somebody looked at the evidence and said we got it wrong. Now, if they looked at the evidence and they got it wrong, that is an example of systemic racism. Yeah. It's not that the cop was bad; he was, right, or allegedly, right. He should have his day in court. But at the end of the day, I don't know. We shouldn't rush to judgment, but at the end of the day, based on the evidence, let's assume he's guilty, right? Let me just assume for a minute that was guilty for the sake of argument. So he did something very wrong, and then the system completely allowed that to be okay. Yeah. And you can go to each of those cases. What changes have been made in Louisiana, fundamental changes, or not Louisiana, in Kentucky, so that when somebody kicks open the wrong door and blasts people and kills them and citizens doing nothing.
What's the accountability?
What's the accountability for that? There's no accountability. Right. Then you go to the third case of the guy who it turns out there was no struggle for the shotgun. They actually hit him with the truck they were chasing him with, jumped out of the car, and shot him 3 times with the shotgun. Yeah. The autopsy originally said wounds to his hand, was what killed him, and like to give again this spooky, this kind of boogeyman thing about there was a fight and he got shot in the hand because he was reaching for the shotgun. Right. And that's why I had to kill him, right? And the prosecutor in that case said no charges, but now there are murder charges.
What was the gap in that one? That one had quite a gap.
Quite a gap.
Yeah.
It was.
That's the part that's horrific. Yeah, that's scary. Like if I had something happen to my family, and you're going to take that long to take action.
I think that's the thing. And then now here's the thing, right? People will try and get everybody focused, and we're going to bring this back to why it matters to corporate America. Right. That's very important. But people focus now on justice for these people, as though prosecuting these criminals who killed these people is going to be enough. I actually think that's counterproductive. I believe those people should have their day in court and they should be punished for what they did. But that is not going to solve this problem. This problem is not 6 people every year that do something wrong.
But what are we doing to address the systematic?
To address the root cause of this, as we would say in engineering, the root cause. Yeah. The systematic defects in engineering are ones that will occur over and over again because we don't change the process or the system.
And until you do, you're just chasing your tail.
You're waiting for it. Reacting. You're waiting for it to happen. That's exactly right. And so that brings me back to, okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about here. That's what we mean by systemic racism. We don't mean that everybody's a racist. Even this word racist is polarizing, right? The system is designed to do exactly what it's doing, and it's doing it really well. And that's what people don't really want to face. It's not, they want to believe that there's an outlier here. It's just a bad cop, or that particular police department is bad. The system is designed to do this.
But, even in the outlier case, and years of engineering leadership that we've both gone through, you experience outlier cases and you see these people are not performing. There's all kinds of jobs where everybody's dealing with poor performers versus strong performers, but there are a few spaces that you can't tolerate that. And this is one of those areas where maybe one example of what are we doing systematically to address that. I've got close friends and family that are officers, that are heroes, that have saved tons of people's lives and pulled people out of burning vehicles. No question. And at the same time, they are going to have to struggle and deal with poor performers, and we can't have it. It's unacceptable, and because you get this type of activity.
Yes. So when there are outliers, and again, this is not a case of outliers, but in the case where there are outliers, I think what you described is exactly right. You need to be able to deal with that. Now, that brings you to a fundamentally different place, right? We've created this narrative that the police are protecting us from a wave of crime that will wash over the suburbs if not for the police being there, right? And you can't get any information that's reliable, right? And I don't think it's necessary to talk about the data, and I'll tell you why. Because we're both engineers, and we both know if you hand us a bunch of data, we can tell all kinds of stories with that data. Sure. But I'll introduce you to a little bit of data here. I've done some research over the last 2 weeks only, and I actually heard this from a South Asian. I was on a kind of a South Asian forum on this topic. There's a bunch of American-born Indian who were talking about this problem and trying to unpack it. And she had some statistics and pointed me to a place that I went and looked. And it was a left-wing George Soros-run organization known as the FBI. So I went to the FBI's website and I looked up crime statistics, and it was shocking to me. The percent of interactions that police have with the public, about 75% of those interactions are related to traffic stops or traffic accidents. A tiny minority of traffic accidents, the majority is traffic stops. That's what the police are doing most of the time, right? The vast majority of the time. So you got to ask yourself, in that instance, now we've created an organization able to handle the worst armed terrorist on earth to a grandma whose cat is stuck in the tree. Yeah. But if you send commandos to fill up a tire, you tend to get these weird situations that occur, right? And that really brings us to this idea of defunding the police, right? It's like, the Dallas police chief, the previous Dallas police chief said it best, right? Are we asking the police to do a little bit too much, right? Are there things going on that they shouldn't be doing? And at the end of the day, the data, you could talk about this data all the time, right? And anybody can turn the data on its head. You could say, okay, well, 75% of the time it's traffic stops, but 2% of the time it's violent crime. So the 2% of the time is what we have to worry about, right? But that would be akin to suggesting that I should send the Army, whose only purpose in life is to defend us using force. The Army is not meant to negotiate. It's meant to project force, and when it's employed, it's intended to destroy what it's pointed at, right? And we have turned the police into a military organization, and it's not by accident. We've done this on purpose, and that's what's causing these problems. It's not a lone cop. It's not one bad policeman. It's not all cops are bad. Those arguments are distractions from getting to the root cause. And the root cause of this problem is that there is a systemic need to create this fiction that black people are terrifying, and that without this thin blue line, they would overrun your neighborhood and you'd be in a lot of trouble. Like somebody was at the Allen, Allen, Texas is a suburb of Dallas. It is a very affluent neighborhood. It's a wonderful place to live. I live just east of it, and it is predominantly white for certain. And somebody was challenging the police chief and mayor at the latest city council meeting, and I wasn't present, but it was reported to me that a citizen had some statistics that suggested that Allen's population is 5% black, but 25 to 30% of the traffic stops are black people. So why is that happening, right? And you just that's just a fundamental question, right? A traffic stop is it has no bearing on what it is impossible to suppose. By the way, it's one of these real things. You could say, well, we care about traffic stops because if people are speeding or they have a broken taillight, that's a public safety hazard. That's disingenuous, because if you really cared about speeding, I'm an engineer. I could put a governor on every car tomorrow that wouldn't let it go 60 miles an hour or less, or more rather. Right. Or I could put a recorder in the car for no price, no cost. It would be so cheap, you and me both know this, that we could record what speed you achieved all year long. And at the end of the year, if you exceeded 60 miles an hour, for each minute you exceed 60 miles an hour, I'd charge you a dime. And so you'd owe me $3,000 if you want to drive around speeding. And that would change behavior instantaneously. Yeah. This traffic stop and frisk, this is all just an excuse to put upon people to continue this mythology. Now, let's get back to the business. Why does this matter to corporations?
Yeah, what I hear from listening to you is that this is a big problem.
It's a huge problem.
It's a huge problem. We're not going to, there's no easy answers. I like the concept of, if we do tend to latch on to the outlier piece because it appeases us and we think, oh, well, once we settle these few cases, we can just move on.
That's right.
And the reality is that's not the case.
That's not the case.
And it needs to be cleaned out, really processed. The root cause needs to really be understood, and we need to think through the differential equation. This is not something, if this, then that. This is way more complex than that. And it's going to take a lot of brains coming together to come up with solutions.
That's right.
But coming back, we kind of got down this path earlier with the need for corporations to make a statement or to have something there, because we've got all these engineers out there that are expecting something. Is that what you were trying to say?
Yeah. So that's not the only reason. So think about this. So I think the police, it's even worse than actually what we're talking about, because the police, the criminal justice system is just the most obvious example. When you turn on your TV and you see a man being strangled that's handcuffed, being strangled for 9 minutes, even the hardest heart has to say something's not quite right. But when you start moving this from just the criminal justice system to the banking system and the housing system and the corporate structures and those type of things, the nuance and brain power required to really understand what the systemic things are in those institutions is much, much harder. So there's, and believe me, there are scholars who've done the thing that might frustrate black people on this topic is we have unpacked this for decades, right? So, and it is so encouraging to see so many different types of people finally deciding they've had enough of this, that it's really encouraging. But it can also be frustrating because you can say to yourself, well, man, this has been obvious to us for a long time. So we've unpacked this. There are black scholars who've done tremendous work on this. You can go look at it. By the way, there are white scholars. If you just don't trust sources, you can look from any angle and you will see the reality of this, right? banking, right? There's predatory lending practices, but you'd say, well, why is that, Mal? That's not true. Everybody gets it. Not true, right? There's something called redlining. I recommend you go research, right? If you go look into redlining, it's practices that denied certain communities services because those communities, essentially because of the demographics of the community. It's a practice of keeping property values low in those areas so that wealth can't get created. It is a well-documented, well-admitted, even the systems that created it will tell you, yes, that's exactly what we were doing. It's not being debated, okay? So these things exist in all institutions, including corporate America. The police thing, the police reform and the idea of the criminal justice reform is so important because if we can't fix that one, we have no hope, because it's just something that even the mass, the silent majority that wants to go back to sleep on this realizes, I can't do that here, right? But these other things, it's much harder. Like, who's going to come out of bed and protest because I got to pay another 0.5% on a loan because I'm black? Nobody's going to protest for that. Too bad for you.
It's easy to sweep that under.
That is impossible, right? Yeah. So if we can't fix this one, how are we going to fix those? Now, here's why it matters. Because corporations, it's not just young people won't put up with it, because they do want a sense of fairness, or they at least want a sense of you stand for something. But corporations are about getting the most out of their employees. Right. It's a productivity. It's a dollar. Nothing matters. Morality is not really the issue here for corporate America. The issue for corporate America is productivity,
engagement, right?
Engagement, yeah. And your employees who are thinking to themselves, "This whole system is rigged. This whole thing has something fishy about it." Why do I know that? Because if I look at the C-suite, there's no black people. There's no women. They just immediately jump to, this thing is rigged. Now, is it rigged? Is it not rigged? It doesn't matter. That's what it matters, but we don't need to debate it. Right. They certainly believe it. Take your white employees. They're in one of three categories. One category loves this system because it's like, hey, at the end of the day, I don't believe there's a problem. I've worked for everything I've got, and if you work for everything you get, then you'd be okay too, right? The other category of people are tremendously guilty that they've been quiet about this, and that they hate it. They just hate that they've been complicit through their silence. By the way, there are black people who are that way too. They were never silent, but they talked for so long into the wind that they just got exhausted, and they're guilty about getting exhausted, right? There are those people. This has an effect on the productivity of your corporation. You cannot get the best out of somebody when they're driving to work, they're worried about whether or not their kids are going to be okay, and whether or not are they invested in the right system, et cetera, et cetera.
So I agree. And we talk about this in the training that we go through in corporate about you never want hostile work environments, and something that might sound to be okay. We just covered this on an episode that's about to go out, or of really a horror story of someone talking about some really inappropriate things with other people around, and that kind of hostile work environment it creates. You've got to maintain that 100% engagement, because your competition is, you just assume they're engaged 100%. I can't have anything other than 100% engagement. So now we have to do something. We have to address it, right? Mm-hmm. Can you speak to, on the corporate side? So I like, it's really eye-opening for me. I had not thought of it that way, but your point of, if we can't solve this, how are we going to solve the even more complicated things? Mm-hmm. Can you give some examples of what you've experienced in the corporate world, that maybe it's unconscious bias or something like that that you've experienced?
I can absolutely give a myriad of examples on all fronts, right? And one thing you said interesting about you that you're going to have an upcoming series or session that you're going to release about horrible things that happen, right? Actually, this is something that corporate America did a pretty good job, in my opinion, on, right? If I come to work and I say, I don't think female executives are good because they're too X, Y, and Z, and there's this, that, and the next thing, I will be slaughtered in a New York minute and asked to leave, right? If you come to work and drop the N-word on me, corporate America's figured out that that's probably not good, right? And so the overt things, done. I mean, it's solved. By the way, it's important. It's important that those things got solved, and it's a good thing. Similarly, right, if I make some overtly racist comment about a white person, right, now there's a debate, right? Racism without power, is it really racism? So I get all of that, but at the end of the day, I would be ushered out the door if I made statements about that too. Now, nobody believes that, but trust me, it happens, and it has happened. I'm an executive. I've seen it happen. Yeah. Okay, so it happens. But I'll give you an example of the more subtle things, right? And I would ask you to think about the impact that this has on your spirit and on your soul. I had an encounter when I happened to take over the vice presidency of an engineering structure at Texas Instruments from another black person. This is a very odd coincidence because there were only 3 or 4 of us, period, in a 30,000 person organization. And the guy I took over for happened to be black, right? It was a coincidence, right? So, but I had employees from around the planet, some in the U.S. and some, actually, let me be specific, some in the U.S. and some in China, who both asked me essentially the same question. And I'm going to paraphrase, but the question was, hey, the guy before you was black and you're black. Is this position for blacks? Right? Because it seems that's
Wow.
and you've got to understand that somebody who's come through America and done what it's taken to become a vice president at a Fortune 500 company, it's just a stark reminder that everybody just thinks you got this job because you're black, despite the fact that there's nobody else black around. It's an interesting thing. The data would suggest if we were handing out jobs like this to black people, there'd be a whole lot of black executives. And quite frankly, we could all sleep at your house, Brent, and we probably never see each other. There's that few of us, right?
Yeah.
So the idea, and you think, and it seems like a minor offense, and the people honestly didn't mean to offend. They literally believed it.
Yeah.
But you got to think what this does to a spirit, to a soul, to know that there are coworkers who have no respect for your ability or for what you've achieved, but rather think that. Meanwhile, nobody ever asks. By the way, every CEO I've ever seen in any corporation I've ever worked for has been white, but it's never entered my mind that the CEO job is just for white people.
Yeah.
That would be horribly defeatist, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's an interesting dynamic. That's an example of a very entrenched thought process that people have.
Right.
And
Now, does that make it so that you're trying to constantly defend your credibility, or you're just trying to fend that off? So you don't want it to impact.
it
you
has
that
an
way?
amazing effect because, and I'll tell you one. Let me speak to a very personal story. Right, I had an assistant who asked me once, "Why are you so hard on your black employees?" And I said, what? And I was like, what are you talking about? I couldn't be more supportive of my black employees. I support all employees. No, she said, I observed that you expect more from them. And I had to check myself. And this assistant, by the way, works for me and was very brave to point this out to me. And I said, okay, I just let it go. And I thought about it deeply. And what I came to realize is that she was 100% correct. I started talking to some people about it, and there was a Hispanic CFO at the corporation that I was working at, and I said, hey, Hispanic CEO guy or CFO guy, have you ever had this he says, yeah, it's very interesting. I found that this is exactly what I was doing. Like, you find yourself wanting to not appear to be favoring the people because you want the meritocracy myth to be true. And so you are holding them to a higher standard than you would hold the other employees because you know what it will take for them to actually get the job.
Sure.
So you're trying to burn them in, as we say in electronics. You're trying to give them some. It's what we do to our kids.
Filter out the defects and make sure we
correct.
get the ones that
you want. You want the one, because let me tell you, when I fail at my job, my entire race fails.
Yeah.
Right. I can have a CEO who does the worst things in the world and actually gets fired for unspecified nonsense that nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody blames the entire white race for that.
Yeah.
But if Barack Obama had flamed out as a president, it would have been, see, we told you guys you shouldn't. It's that kind
Back
of.
to the old
and by the
white
way,
guys.
am I right? Exactly right. Let's go back to the old white guys. That's about now. Am I right about this? It doesn't matter. I'm not really here to debate whether what I'm saying is true or false. Right. What I'm here to illustrate is this is the thinking. This is what is in all of our hearts as Americans, right? This is how we're thinking about it. So at work, right? That's an example at work, right? I had an example at work where I said once to somebody, women should be able to do what, and it was a turn of phrase I used, right? That was wrong, right? And I didn't even believe me when I tell you it. And I'm not, I don't lack intelligence. It took me a year to understand why it was wrong, and I got jumped all over by a bunch of females. Thank you, by the way, and I had to think about that. But and no one would tell you. I hope I have this in my heart. I hope no one would tell you that I am nothing other than an ally to wanting to make equality for females in corporations a reality. So I'm an ally, and I got it handed to me. You know how hard this is, right? There are millions of people right now who are standing up saying, Hubie, I want to help you fix this problem. First of all, I don't know how to fix it, and second of all, it's not my problem. So we got to, but they're frustrated by that. They're okay. So I'm trying to help, and now you're getting on me about that, but this is hard, right?
Yeah.
But I give you an example of how this kind of institutionalized racism, it permeates everything, including work, right? Think about the character it takes for me to get past what those two people asked me. I could have just gone home and crawled into the fetal position and said,
Right.
what am I doing all of this for? I graduate high school with great grades. I go to college. I join the American Navy. I serve my nation proudly. I get hired on to a corporation. I stick with it. I work all my way up through. I do all the things that they tell you. This is the American dream. I become vice president only to be told you got that job because you're black. And then people say, why are black people so angry?
Yeah.
Right? You can answer that question yourself, right? We're not angry. We're actually less angry than we probably should be. We actually believe most deeply in the American dream. And we actually believe that we're the ones that can make the aspiration come true. Until we reach that aspiration, America is nothing more than a dream. And this is what we really have to think about. And this permeates corporations. It's not just politics. This permeates corporations. Corporations have to take a stand. There was a ruling not so long ago that corporations are people. There was a big joke about that. And of course, I disagreed with it because I knew what it was about. It was about just being able to pump money and buy politicians and all that other stuff. And I was on the other side of that argument. But okay, let's imagine for a minute corporations are people. Then let's hold them to a standard. What's your opinion, people? You got to have an opinion. And you got to weigh in on this, and you've got to put your effort behind making it better. I will tell you why. Where I work at Texas Instruments, one of our core values is that we want to be a company that our communities are proud to have as a neighbor. This has been written down. It's been spoken about. It's kind of how we want to operate the corporation. Well, if you are not weighing in on this, are you a good neighbor? Are you? And by the way, corporations hold tremendous power, right? They control healthcare for people. They control people being able to make a living. And by the way, most beautifully, they control making real change in the world for positive, right? We make electronics affordable for everybody. So you can have all of these amazing tools, right? And you can use those tools for anything. I look at people filming police doing bad things and criminals doing bad things with technology, right? These things, I look at electric vehicles. I look at, there's a myriad of things. These are beautiful things that corporations do. I am pro-capitalism for sure, okay? But with great power comes great responsibility. You can learn everything you need to know from Stan Lee. Okay, this is the bottom line. He's right. Okay, and corporations have to step in here. They have to weigh in, and I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing them do that. Now, what we have to be careful about is, are they doing it because they're trying to help the system get back to equilibrium?
Yeah, and that was my question. My next question was going to be, what should we be doing? What should corporations be doing? What should corporate be doing? It's one thing I think we've talked about. You have to make some sort of statement. Mm-hmm. I was really proud to see my company make a statement and stand out and say, and not wait. And not, it was early on to make a statement. And I think for the reasons you mentioned, it helps engagement. It promotes conversation. It promotes discussion, which helps enhance worldview. It helps all these things, which helps us win, because as we've already talked about, engagement's critical, right?
It's critical.
What else should corporate and think about other companies out there? Like, I've got folks that listen that are brand new startups that are young companies that get 10, 20, 30 people. What else should we be doing?
Absolutely. So, these things are all about opinion. So I'm gonna give you my opinion. If I was running the planet, or a corporation, my view, I'd have two or three things I would do for sure. The first thing is you have to, and we talked about it, you have to have an opinion, right? And you have to be willing to voice the opinion. I think that's important because, as you said, it creates dialogue and it creates engagement. Now, the reason dialogue and engagement is so important is because the strategy really now is, you've done enough to eliminate overt racism, and a white supremacist who's working at Texas Instruments will struggle to survive. They won't be able to survive there. But a person invested in this system can survive. So what you've got to do is you've got to find a platform to make it very uncomfortable for those people. You can't fire them because it's not overt and they're not doing anything quote unquote wrong. They're just invested in a very corrupt system. And whether they're invested purposefully or not doesn't matter. So you've got to find a way to make it uncomfortable. So what
you're talking about people who are loosely invested in something like white supremacy,
correct,
yeah.
or something just
or
just the systemic racism
anything
that exists.
like that. Yeah.
If you are denying that this problem exists today,
Right.
you are the problem.
Got it.
Right?
Understood.
And I think that's true today. Now we can argue about the nuance of the problem, but that there is a problem, it's irrefutable. There's nobody left arguing that except for white supremacists and racists. Everybody else agrees there's a problem. They just might disagree who's at fault.
Or how to fix it.
Yeah,
or what
somebody
to
might
do.
say, hey, this is a problem, but it's the black people. I don't care about that. I care that nobody should be saying this is not an issue. Right. Okay? So if you're those people, you don't want those people at your corporation because they are creating a work environment that prevents us from bringing our 100% of our energy to work.
It's disengaging.
It's disengaging, right? So you got to get rid of those people. How do you get rid of them? You make it uncomfortable for them. How do you make it uncomfortable for them? You talk about it. I get people all the time who say, man, not another diversity topic. That's when I know it's working because I love it. Yeah. I want you to be uncomfortable about this until it's fixed because the system, remember, the silent majority want to go back to being silent about this. Yeah. Great. You can go back to being silent the minute we get some progress on this thing and we fix it. So as a corporation, you have to commit to really talking about this, especially when it's not in the news cycle. And imagine how difficult that is. Nobody wants to come to some diversity conversation or talk about, and especially, by the way, white employees, right? We have all kinds of diversity initiatives. There's no white diversity initiative. So why would you come to that, right? Why would I come to those other things? Corporations have to figure out how to fix that problem because that is a real problem. The most important people in this conversation are missing from the conversation. So my first advice is take a stand, right? Have a position. And again, it doesn't have to be my position. Just have a position because people will care. They will want to know. And if your position is off-putting to a lot of people, you're going to know it because they're going to vote. They're going to leave. They're just going to leave, right? Then make it super uncomfortable for racists to exist at your company. And you do that by talking about these things, by continuing to suggest and have policies, not just conversation, but policies that really make it clear to people that what you're about and what you will stand for and what you won't stand for. That will aggravate people enough, right? Yeah. Like, think about what NASCAR did. NASCAR said, we're going to ban the Confederate symbols from our play. Now, is that important? That's minor. Somebody would say it's minor. It's not minor. It's huge. Because it says, if you really believe in this, maybe we don't want you as a fan.
Right.
That's a real position.
Yeah.
Okay? That's a real position.
Well, it establishes a vector that says this is valuable to us and this is the direction we're going to go.
That's it.
Get off the train if you want, but this is where
that's exactly right. It's a
going.
democracy. You don't have to get on the train, right? But that's where we're going as a train, right? So you got to be willing to talk about it and talk about it over again, and you got to have policies that support the direction you want to go in. Maybe an example of that policy would be, everybody always says, well, what should we do about this? And they end up landing on the goals. Like some of the goals might be more diversity in the C-suite. That's a goal. That's not really, how do you get that to happen, right? And then people start saying, well, you start unpacking it, and then you get to people who say, well, we want to have 3 women and 2, but what? That's not a strategy. That's a goal. Okay, and the goal's fine. You got to have a goal out there, okay? But that brings me to the next thing I think you need, the third thing that you need to do. So 1, I believe you need to have a stand. 2, you need to talk about it and make it with the purpose of making it very uncomfortable for people to exist who don't ascribe to your corporate values, okay? Because again, you're trying to enable your workforce, okay? The third thing you need to do is you need to have some accountability inside your corporation around these things. I hear all the time that there's not enough of a pipeline of black employees to really promote. That's the age-old retort is, well, we can't find people who are eligible to do the show, or there aren't enough women. Finally, people have gotten off of that because there's so many women working now that you can't claim you can't find women who are capable of doing this work, right? But if your recruiting office and your human resources department is not capable of finding these people, then get a new recruiting department and get a new HR department. And I don't care what it takes to do it. It might take you investing in local schools and ushering kids through all the way through college, and might take you 20 years before you get a cohort of a couple of hundred employees who could give you some diversity. Go invest and make it happen. Because here's one thing I do know. Corporations are full of some of the brightest, most well-funded, brilliant people on earth. And when these people want something, it just happens. They and it's work.
Maybe talk a little bit about the value of diversity that you've seen. Like, why should these folks care about doing that and bringing in this wide variety of?
Yeah, very, very straightforward. Okay. So number one, there's 100 reasons. I'll just give you my top three. Let me just say, right. So number one is everybody wants to believe they can achieve what their dreams are. And there's nothing better than being able to see somebody that looks like you, thinks like you, who says, man, like when I became vice president, I got 1,000 emails that said, we're really happy that somebody like you could get that job, because we didn't really think somebody like you could get that job. And what they really were talking about is not race. They were talking about, they had this, because like maybe I was the first, maybe it was a group of employees that came up with me, right? So they knew me really well. So maybe the specter of the executives that they don't know is like these scary people, and you've got to be a throat slitting monster to become an executive, right? So they were just happy that what they perceived to be a decent human being got this job.
One of
right?
us.
Yeah. And the retort, the end of the email was always, and please don't kill our spirit by becoming an a-hole, right? And I'm paraphrasing, but this was real. I saved all these emails. They're fantastic, right? So people want to see somebody like them in these positions because it inspires them. And inspiring people is what leadership is about. Sure. So if you don't have a variety of people, well, how can you do it? That's number one, okay? Number two is our experiences inform us, right? And everybody talks about this all the time. All you got to do to get a bright idea. I was in Japan once, and I was on a bus ride. We're talking about the beautiful island of one of the islands of Japan earlier, right? So I was in Japan once, and we were riding on a bus. We were on our way to a customer, and I was there as an observer. And my boss was senior vice president. We were going to a tough customer that was really unhappy with the service we were providing. And we were trying to figure out what could we do to make this customer happy, because they were important to us, of course. And I noticed there was a young lady who was coming in, and she was pouring the drinks for everybody around the table as we were talking about it. And we were getting ready to jump on the bus, but we were trying to brainstorm because we were time crunched and we were on our way. And so we were I was watching this lady come in, and she was pouring drinks, and she asked me, "Hey, would you like some coffee?" I said, "No, I'm fine, thank you." And so she got on the bus with us, though. And I thought, well, that's strange. Why would the person who helps us with refreshments come to this meeting? So I made my way to the back of the bus, and I sat down next to her, and I said, "Excuse me, what do you do here?" And she says, "Oh, I run the field application engineering team for the Japan region," and blah, blah, blah. Turns out this lady was an engineer. I started picking her brain. I say, "Hey, what do you think we should do about this? This is a big problem." And she rattled off 5 ideas that were better than anything we had ever talked about and came up with.
Right.
But she wasn't even at the table.
Yeah.
Right? Why wasn't she at that table? She had the answers. And by the way, I said, "Hey, why don't we use this idea?" She immediately, and there was a cultural problem with me. Just, I'm American. I'm like, great idea, right? By the way, that's the beautiful thing about America is if you've got a great idea, we just make you American. We don't care where you came from, right? It was like, if you got a great idea, like we don't care where Elon Musk was born. Right. He's ours, right? We don't care about that, right? The guy who sent people to the moon was a German rocket scientist.
We like winning.
That's it, winning, right? Except for the Confederacy. That's the one losers we back, right? But other than that, we're on board, right? We love winners other than those 4 years of morons that lost, right? Everybody else we love, right? Okay. But she was there, and she had the ideas. The diversity matters because her perspective allowed her to see something that none of us could see, and none of those male Japanese guys could see. And just having her at that table, but she couldn't get to the table. She was in the room, and she got to come along only because her title demanded it, but there was no real input being sought from her. Okay, and that's an example of where diversity can help, right? Because she had answers. And by the way, our company was weaker. It was weaker because I didn't stand up and say, "Wait a second, there's something very wrong here," right? I said, well, I can't. You know what I said to myself? I said the same thing most white Americans are saying about this. Well, I can't change this whole Japanese system. And I was like, I'm not even Japanese. How can I possibly comment on something Japanese? And the same thing white people. Well, this is a black problem. I can't. Oh my God. It was just right in my face. I was like, there I am being the silent majority for nonsense, right? Yeah. And this woman had answers. Okay, and if I could go back in time, she'd probably even remember me. But if I could go back in time, I would apologize to her for just not insisting that we just take her and put her at the front. You know how to solve this problem? You know what we could have solved conquering that customer? We could put her in charge.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, she had ideas and energy. She would have made mistakes, and it would have been a bloodbath, and we might have won, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to what really happened, which was we did some incremental nonsense that didn't really work, right?
Yeah.
And so there's an example of why
a
diversity
good example.
matters, okay? And it's,
Yeah.
it's a very real example, and I think the third reason is because, you only get one chance at a who invented the integrated circuit, Brent?
Jack Kilby.
Jack Kilby. We're very proud of that. Jack Kilby is a Texas Instruments guy. He invented the integrated circuit. He's the guy who figured out how to put a couple of transistors together to make something amazing. So everything you do today is informed by what Jack Kilby did, all right? Jack Kilbys of the world, the Jackie Robinsons of the world, the Michael Jordans of the world, the Albert Einsteins of the world. These people come along once in a generation, twice in a generation. You cannot have an environment where you miss out on that because of something like this.
That's
It
a great
is
point.
ridiculous
That's a
to
great
think
point.
that Jack Kilby would have walked out of TI because we don't like 6'8" white guys.
That's
right?
that's a kind of example to me that inspires me, because then I'm going, even the unconscious things I want to uncover. Like I was having dinner with some friends last night. We were talking about this concept of everybody's got a basement. Everybody's got skeletons down there. And the question is, do you have the courage to go down there and poke around a little bit and see what you learn? The thought of what you're talking about right there inspires me to want to go in the basement and clean stuff out, because you never know what kind of unconscious thing that's there that's causing you to miss out on somebody like that. And, as a guy who I love to develop talent and see people, come to really unlock their capability, and the idea that somebody's there missing out because of my lack of vision and diversity is horrifying.
It's horrifying.
That's horrifying.
And you think about that, and think about how hard this is, right? You to stare at something like that personally, and to stare at a system that you believe in, by the way. And by the way, the system has produced amazing results.
Sure.
We as a nation have done amazing things. My team exists in I think 14 or 15 different places on the globe. And so all over the planet. And I've gotten notes about this from all over the planet. And universally, the sentiment is, man, this is not America. We didn't think this is what happened there. And we're kind of embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed. This is another example. People are begging us to figure this out. Do you know why? Because we're the only ones truly trying. This great experiment is unbelievable. It's unprecedented in human time. People will claim that they're doing, that they have diversities. There are homogeneous societies that are looking at us and saying this will never work, right? And so I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud that this is the effort it takes. This is what you're seeing here is a willingness to stare into a blackness that is overwhelming. But we're doing it. Why? Yeah. Because we believe in this dream. This dream matters to the world. That is our gift to the world. Yeah. People say Americans are arrogant, but it is the only thing about my nation that's exceptional, is the fact that we believe deeply in exactly this kind of thing we're talking about. Now, we don't achieve it, but we believe in it. We will take you from anywhere. So my point to you about you like your point you made, like the willingness to stare at this, like what that inspires you to do it. It is very important, but think about how hard it is. Think about what is the likelihood that these conversations are really going to be happening 30 days from now, unless somebody else gets shot and killed who was unarmed and doing something minor and petty, and people burn down a Wendy's. Yeah. Nobody is going to be upset about this again because it's so difficult. Yeah. And that is what I believe we as a people have to fight against. We really need to demand and enable real substantive change, right? And I think that's never easy.
All right, I have two final things for you. One, Joe Schmo out there, what can they do? What should they do? And they're just in their corporate life, wherever they are there things that it's almost like you can plug anything you want here if there's something that somebody should go to. Right?
So my first thing is to educate yourself. Realize that our system of education has largely ignored this. Okay, if you go to Germany, you cannot make a mistake that the Germans understand deeply the scars caused to the planet by the Nazis. Okay, and the Germans should be applauded for how they approach it. They stare at it and they own it. If you want to get a real passionate, upset discussion about Nazis, go to Germany and bring that up. They would descend upon you because they know it shouldn't happen, and they own it.
Yeah.
That's real ownership. Okay,
Yeah.
you would never see a German flying a Nazi flag. I mean, that creates a lot of unrest in Germany, right?
Mm-hmm.
We carry a Confederate flag around like it's not a problem. That's why that matters. It's a lack of ownership that's disturbing. So the first thing is educate yourself, and you cannot rely on the education you've received because it's inadequate. Okay, there are 1,000 resources, but I'm going to give you one that I think is easy. Okay, I happened to watch this last night, just by happenstance. Somebody sent it to me. John Oliver is a British comedian who's moved to America, and he has a show every Sunday. He does a show, I think it's called Last Week on Sunday or something like that.
Last Week Tonight.
Thank
like
you,
that.
Brent. He did a session last night on the police. Okay, It's a 30 minutes. You can watch it. It is difficult. It's not bloody. It's just difficult because it's right in your face about how he feels, and you can listen to the guy, and he's not even from America. It's just 30 minutes, and if you watch that, it will educate you on the depths of this in 30 minutes. So you don't have to read the millions of pages that have been created by black scholars on this subject. Just listen to that British guy for 30 minutes. That's one thing you can do. Educate yourself because you'll understand it. And once you understand it, you'll be a little bit more open to the ideas like reforming the police or changing how we look at corporate structures. Just watch it and educate yourself. Easy. Everybody can do it. Okay? And I learned something during that session as well. Okay? The second thing you do is to, and again, this is my suggestion. You said if I could wave a magic wand, what are my things? Please get courageous about talking about this. And that's black people and white people. Black people do not want to talk about this. It's painful. But white people do not want to talk about this. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing. Okay? I do not want to be a sexist, and I might say something in defense of women that's really offending them, right? Too bad, right? We got to get over that. The political correctness has paralyzed us, right? Intent is what matters. And if you intend to learn, if you intend to be part of the solution, I don't care what you have to say. I'll hear it and I will help you, okay? And you can teach me something. And I reject this notion that we can't have this conversation because we're too afraid. That is the playbook of supremacists, is to keep you quiet because you're afraid of offending the people that should be together. We have to come together on that. That's my two suggestions. Educate yourself and talk about it. My third suggestion, and I won't make a specific one, is there's nothing in America that ever happens, ever. I mean from the simplest thing to the most complex, that is not driven by money. That is the great secret of America. Is we are at our core money people. Okay, so money is what matters. Demand that the money in your life, be it the corporation you work for, be it your own personal donations, demand that it goes towards something that is making a difference in this space. And that's what I would ask from all the beautiful people doing so much work to really make change on this, is we need a very clear-cut place where people can really get the agenda, and it's simple enough, and that we can all start pouring our resources into it, our time, our money, and our efforts, because it's too, there are all of these polarizing stuff. We just need to come together as a nation and figure out something simple that everybody can get behind that on this one, right? And then we just overwhelm it.
As opposed to something that always seems to have an asterisk on it.
Asterisk, polarizing, asterisk, we're not sure, we're trying to do too much. This one, let's just focus like a laser and fix this one, because it will blaze the trail on how to fix all the others.
Yeah. All right, our final thing here. At the end of all of our episodes, we do something called our minutia point, which is, what's the thing that if you were going to go back in time and talk to 22-year-old Hubie Payne, and you're going to whisper something in your ear on this topic of how to deal with racism in the workplace, racism in general, and make your career easier to process, what would you have told yourself? What's that thing you'd go back in time and tell yourself to give you a leg up?
That's a tough one. I think it's interesting. I think the one thing, as I've reflected back over the last few weeks on this, is, when my dad told me, do not move to Texas and take that job. And I said, why, Dad? He said, because when I was conscripted into the Army during World War II, I was sent to San Antonio for boot camp. He had never been to the South, so he rode on a train. And when he hit the Mason-Dixon line, he had to get off the train, and they segregated it. And then no more food came his way. They had to get food off of a little barbecue guy who was barbecuing, the black guy at every stop. And things just changed a little bit, right? Yeah. So he still had that experience in his head. And this was 1998 or something, right? And of course, I was 1998 Hubie, and my dad's a dinosaur. And don't worry, Dad, Texas is not the same. I've been to Houston. It seemed fine. It was cosmopolitan. It's not a problem, right? So I brushed it off and I went. And what galvanized me I respect my dad a great deal. What galvanized me about what he told me was, I'm going to go make it. I'm going to show him that this country's gotten better, and I'm going to show him that I can do it. Okay. And part of achieving a vice presidency at a Fortune 500 company, that was a big motivator for me. But what I would tell 22-year-old Hubie is that this myth that you can work hard and you can just do the right things and you can be better than everybody else and cream will rise to the top. That'll show them, and that will be your contribution, and that can fix things, is not enough.
Yeah.
The system itself is broken, and never stop working on fixing that system. Those things I talked about are important. I'm enormously proud of what I've accomplished, and I'm enormously proud of the people that helped me accomplish it.
Yeah.
By the way, my parents, black people, white people, all kinds of people have helped me what I've accomplished, and I'm proud of those people for helping me. But I would tell 22-year-old Hubie, hey, the system itself needs to be adjusted, and you got to keep working on that. What your dad described was absolutely correct. And just because a Barack Obama gets where he's going to get, or a Hillary Clinton achieves what she's going to achieve, or a Michael Jordan achieves what he achieves, doesn't mean those things are outliers.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't prove anything to anyone. It just in fact the bad angels in our I don't know what the devils, I guess, I don't know the right word to use, but the people I would argue are on the wrong side of this argument will use that as the example. Hey, Obama's a president, racism's over. Hey, Hubie Payne's a vice president, he did it, why can't you do it? And et al. Right. And that is what I would whisper in Hubie Payne's ear, is that you got to invest along the way, right? Because I kind of feel like I might have wasted 10, 20 years of not really trying to figure out ways to speak about this and do something about this. Because
otherwise, you wind up with this idealist mindset and you just rail against it and you just get perpetually angry.
And very frustrated.
Yeah,
that's exact. And that's what you're feeling from a lot of people, right?
Sure.
And not, I mean, all spectrum of life, you're feeling that from a lot of people. So if this is the end, I would point out, like all things in America, I will tell you, there is if I'm a bit of like I was joking at work the other day that I'm a bit of a student of history, right? I think it was Winston Churchill who said, he was trying to get his countrymen to have some hope about whether or not America would enter World War II and help, right? Mm-hmm. And he told them that have no fear, because America always does the right thing after it has exhausted every other option. So and that always made me laugh. And I think we might be here. Yeah. And so take heart, right? Don't be negative. Don't be overwhelmed by the enormity of this, right? This dream is too important to the world for us to let go. This is our legacy to the planet. When this empire comes to an end, as all empires come to an end, we want to be remembered as the people who figured this out. This will be what we don't want to be remembered for the GDP, right. And those are the means to a bigger end. Yeah. And the bigger end is really bringing people together. So be hopeful, because at the end of the day, nothing has excited me more than when I look at these protests and I look at people wanting to speak about this. I mean, I'm in a very rural part of Texas right now that I don't even know how I got here, Brent. Thank you. But you invited me to have this conversation. We don't agree on all these points, but this is a tiny thing, but it is making a difference. And there's a million things like this happening right now. There's reasons to be hopeful. So that's what I would leave you with.
Thank you, Hubie. Thanks for taking the time to come and talk. It's like the timing of the need for the conversation is incredible, and if anybody to talk to it, you're the best for it. So this was gold.
Well, I'm grateful. Thank you.
super grateful and thankful for Mr. Hubie Payne for coming and sharing his thoughts and inputs with us on such a challenging topic. Part of what podcasting is all about is getting conversation going. And you get to listen to people have conversations, and the whole point's for make you feel like you're sitting in the room being a part of that conversation. Well, we'd like to hear from you as well. So we're out there there's a Facebook site, there's Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on just about everything you could imagine, whether you're on LinkedIn or any of the various locations where you're seeing information about the episode. I want to encourage you to go out there and share your inputs. What do you think? How should corporations be seeing this issue? What can they do? We didn't get into super detailed tactical things. I'd like to hear feedback on those things too. What are the things you feel like that companies can do to keep engagement with employees and make a difference in this area? So please let us know.
Well, and Brent, you and Hubie discussed the impact that TI has had in the statement they put out, what you're impressed by. It might be interesting to see what other corporations have put out, what statements they've done that people have liked.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to see. Folks, have a good week. Thank you for listening in, and we'll see you next time.